Hey folks, it's Ray at DCRainmaker.com, and today we got a complete power meter pedal comparison. Now I'm going to go through all the nuances of these particular pedals, both the good and the bad, and it's based on a lot of years of usage. At the high end here, I've got nearly 5 years of usage on the Favero Assioma, and at the low end, I've got almost a year of usage on the newer Wahoo Speedplay pedals. And that's not just based on day-to-day riding, but also based on using these in testing other products, both other power meters as well as trainers, smart trainers, and smart bikes. And I can tell you where they work well and where they fall a little bit short. Now you can use the YouTube chapters along the bottom right there, like not here, but like on your screen, to find the section you're most interested in. Also note that this video is sponsored by SteadyRack. They make bike racks, but not pedals, so you don't have to worry about any sort of conflict of interest there. Also, they have no control over what's in this video, and they haven't even seen it themselves either. So with that, let's get into the very first thing, which is pricing and cleat compatibility. Now, if you've decided on a power meter pedal, it's likely being driven by your cleat type, either one that you want to go to or one that you already have. So each of these models have different cleat types they support. On the Favero side, they support the Lokio style cleats. It's not technically the same, but it's close enough for most purposes. But they also support the Shimano Ultegra style cleats. But when you buy a Favero Assioma pedal in this design, you have to put it together yourself. So you have to buy a pedal from Shimano and then go ahead and buy the spindle from Favero. Versus if you buy their Lokio cleat, it just comes like ready to roll. So just keep that in mind. Then if you look at the Garmin's offerings, they've got basically 3 different offerings using the same spindle. So they have the Lokio version, the same kind of style as this, but it is an official Lokio cleats or pedal compatibility. They have the Shimano SPD-SL road pedals. Then they have what is typically a mountain bike pedal, an off-road pedal with the Shimano SPD. Now the main appeal to the Garmin Rally system is the idea that you can go ahead and buy additional pedal cases and swap a spindle, which is the part where all electronics are, between those different pedals. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on, but that is one of the core benefits of the Rally system that doesn't exist for the other ones. Next, there is the SRM X-Power system, and that's on SPD. You'll note that SRM also sells their exact pedal on the road side. I wouldn't recommend that. That is a hot dumpster fire of a mess. Just don't buy that pedal. Really, don't buy it. Buy anything else, don't buy that particular pedal. But this one on the SPD side is awesome for the most part, and we'll talk about that more as we get into the video. Then after that, you have Wahoo with their Speedplay Zero-based pedal. This just was announced about a month ago now. As mentioned, though, I've been using it for quite a while. In fact, you can see some of those nice marks there for some pretty hard off-road hits. In fact, I've used all these pedals both on-road and off-road. Obviously, some are suited more to that than others. If you're in deep mud and stuff like that, the SPD styles is better for that. But if you're like gravel riding, you can kind of get away with any of these just fine on either of those scenarios. So now let's talk pricing. I'm just going to throw it on the screen there, and you can kind of read this price chart yourself while I talk through it a little bit. At the high end, you have SRM from a price standpoint. At the low end, you have Favero from a price standpoint. I would not conflict that or conflate that with the accuracy of those products, the durability of those products, or anything like that. Arguably, Favero makes not just the best bang for their buck, but potentially even the most accurate unit in this particular lineup here. And on the other side, SRM has the least amount of battery life, but accuracy does seem pretty good, durability pretty good as well. Point being, you're buying that based on like branding more than you are based on the underlying capabilities, technologically, reliability, durability of these products. And you see that especially on the Garmin side, where the Garmin pedals cost almost twice as much as Favero pedals, but deliver effectively the same stuff. However, the one thing that Garmin does allow you to do that none of the others do is the ability to swap pedal spindle. Again, that's that spinny part right here between different pedal types without having to buy entirely new pedals, so at least entirely new power meter pedals. So that means that you can buy an extra pedal casing for the Lokio or the Shimano SPD-SL or the Shimano SPD, and just remove the spindle. I have an entire video on that in the corner there. It takes just a few minutes, and then you can go from basically a road bike configuration to a mountain bike configuration. Perhaps you do that in the fall, for example. And that all works great, and you spend just a few $100 doing that. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that it's not something you want to do every single day or even every single week. I think over time, you might eventually damage the pedals doing that removal and insertion process over and over again. Almost always cheaper to simply buy 2 crankset or crank arm-based power meters for those 2 different bikes than it is to go ahead and buy a set of pedals plus the extra set of pedal bodies. But again, you may have different reasons why you want to do that. Just something to keep in mind. Also something to keep in mind, if you're finding this video interesting or useful, just simply whack that like button right now at the bottom. It really does help out this video and the channel quite a bit. So next up, we've got the weights and sizes. Now, first off, starting with weight. On the spectrum of weights, you have weights where the majority of the weight is in the pedal, and then other end you have the majority of the weight in the cleat, or at least a heavy amount of the weight in the cleat. So I'm going to bring off my handy dandy like pie chart here of, I'm dropping some screws, of the cleat side of it. So what you see right here are basically 3 different cleat styles, and the pedal for no good reason. So in this little pile right here, you have your SPD cleats. As you can see, they're very, very small and thus pretty lightweight in the grand scheme of things. However, on the flip side, the pedals that go with that are much bulkier and much heavier. So the weight transfer is to the pedal more so than the cleat. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got the Speedplay system. In this case here, a fair chunk of that weight is transferred into the cleat as opposed to being in the pedal. So if I look at the weights of the Wahoo Speedplay pedal, it's way less than the rest of them. But again, that bulk as well as the weight is transferred here into this mess of stuff you got to put on the bottom of your shoe. And then in the middle here is the Lokio and Shimano SPD-SL system, where it kind of, again, just, well, it sits in the middle in terms of the weight and that compromise there. Looking at the weights, I'll throw them all on the screen right now, and you can see the actual weights as well as total system weight. This is the weight of the pedal plus the cleats and then the cleat hardware. So that's like the screws and the stuff like that attaches the cleats to your cycling shoes. Now, when it comes to installation, all these pedals are silly easy to install. Gone are the days where you got to have specialized tools and do lots of weird stuff. You basically have 1 of 2 options here. 1 is a hex wrench, or 2 is a pedal wrench. This is not my best pedal wrench, but I just couldn't find my other ones right now. So in the case of the pedal wrench ones, you'll see that the bottom here has something that protects that spindle or covers the spindle or utilizes the spindle, so you can't stick in a hex wrench into that. Instead, you just use a pedal wrench like normal and pop it on, super easy. And in the case of the hex wrench ones, they've mostly got a pod right there, and so you can't use a pedal wrench on that. Instead, use a hex wrench on the inside. It's as easy as that. There's really no complexity there. The main thing you got to keep in mind on all these, though, is that you need to go ahead and set the crank length. And you'll do that on both the smartphone app that comes with these pedals as a baseline, but you should also always double check your bike computer because it may not transfer that value into it. And if those values aren't correct, then you'll get a slight inaccuracy with your pedals until that crank length is set. Next up, we got Q factors and other like data point things. I'm gonna kind of run through these relatively quickly since they're relatively boring. Q factor is essentially a measurement from the end of the crank arm to the midpoint of the pedal itself. The Favero has actually a pretty good diagram I'll throw on the screen right now to show this here. And all these are all very similar, except one, which is Favero's own Shimano pedal. In this case, the Shimano SPD-SL pedal, the one that you have to arts and crafts project yourself. Because Favero can't get this done natively with Shimano's obviously not cooperating on that, they've got to retrofit an existing pedal, which means they add more length to it. And it's about 10 millimeters longer than their existing pedal and then the rest of the pedals here. Now, as I noted earlier on, this video is sponsored by SteadyRack. Unlike all these pedals here, they don't actually care what kind of cleat type or pedal you use on your bike. The SteadyRack system allows you to store your bike vertically against a wall, while also enabling the bike to pivot out of the way. Installation is quick and easy, taking only just a few minutes, and then once installed, there's no need to lift your bike off the ground to put it on the rack. You simply roll it up on its back wheel and then put it right into the rack. The rack will do the lifting for you and then cradles your bike by the front wheel, ensuring it's not being held by the frame, the rim, the spokes, or anything else that might do damage. They've got 4 different models, from road bike to mountain bike to fat bike. There's even a model for bikes with fenders, all holding up to 35 kilos or 77 pounds. But the real kicker here is that these racks pivot up to 160 degrees, which is essential since my hallway here in the cave doesn't actually have a ton of space. So this is perfect for me because I can hold nearly half a dozen bikes without blocking the actual hallway. Well, I've got all sorts of crazy gear here in the DCR cave. This silly lineup of bikes on the wall is one of the most practical additions I've had in a long time. It just works perfectly every single time. You can find a link down in the description there for more information. Next, let's talk about the impact of the pedal design and size on cornering. Now, there's 2 parts to this whole question. The first part is whether or not these pedals get easily damaged when you corner and hit the pedal. And the answer to that is simply no, they don't get easily damaged. And we've got many, many years of pedal cornering incidents and rocket incidents with the mountain bike ones to show that there is not a problem with spindles getting damaged by people hitting them on the road surface or on rocks over time. And then again, we've got like almost a decade worth of experience showing that's just simply not the case. So that's a good one to set aside and say no problem there. The second question then is to what degree can you corner with these different pedals? And the answer is a pretty high degree. So what I did is I set up my bike right here and I put a level on it so I can measure the exact amount of tilt that I can get on every single one of these pedals. And I just simply went down until the pedal touched the ground at a flat point. Now you can see right here, they're all pretty darn similar. At the higher end, you've got the Wahoo Speedplay ones that are a little bit higher at 39 degrees. Keep in mind, this is on my bike with with 175 millimeter crank arms, which means that's a little bit longer than the average crank arm, which means it's going to hit a little bit sooner than a more standard 172.5 millimeter crank arm. Also note that the height of your bottom bracket will play a part in it. That'll be different between a mountain bike and a road bike. And even my different road bikes have had different heights of the bottom bracket to the ground and produce dramatically different results depending on that. So this particular Cannondale bike I tested right here has a slightly higher bottom bracket than my Canyon bike and a slightly higher bottom bracket than my Giant bike. So again, going to produce different results. In this case, slightly more favorable than my Giant bike being lower to the ground, which will corner and hit the ground sooner. Still, all of these pedals are much thinner than their predecessors. So if we look at something like the Garmin Vector 1 edition, or even the PowerTap P1 or P2, which are just beefcakes of pedals, those would hit the ground much sooner than most of these pedals here today. And it's worth noting in the past when I've compared the stock pedals like from a Lokio or a Shimano pedal to these, we're only about 1 to 2 degree difference, which is very, very similar when you're talking 37 to 38 degrees. Next up, we're going to talk some of the smarts tech here. So all these here use rechargeable battery types, except the Garmin ones, which use a single coin cell battery. A slight change from the Vector 3 side of things, but it's for the better. We haven't seen any battery issues on the Garmin Rally series in the last year, as well as really the Vector 3 series since they changed that battery pod almost 2 years ago. Certainly there are pros and cons to both of those. The main thing to look at is really the battery life. In the case of Garmin, they're roughly double the battery life of the rechargeable ones. And on the rechargeable front, the Wahoo and Favero units are pretty much the same versus the SRM unit is about half of that again. All these pedals have some sort of status LEDs on them to help you troubleshoot and pair and validate things are working correctly. And then all of them have both ANT+ and Bluetooth smart compatibility. However, the details within that varies quite a bit. So all these will broadcast your total power, your power balance, as well as your cadence across both ANT+ and Bluetooth Smart. And then all of these, except for the Wahoo ones, will also broadcast your torque effectiveness and pedal smoothness. Now, whether or not you'll use that data, probably debatable. And then going a step further, both the Garmin and the Favero ones broadcast cycling dynamics. Now, within that, of course, they do that differently as well. Cycling dynamics show more information about your pedal stroke as you ride along. SRM does something vaguely similar, but only within their app itself, so it's not really super useful out on the road, versus with the Favero and Garmin pedals, you can see that on your Garmin head units. You can't see that on other head units yet, though, because they don't support that, though it is a standard they could adopt if they wanted to. Now, within cycling dynamics, you're going to get a bunch of additional stats like your power phase, in other words, where you're putting out the most power in your stroke. You'll get things like your platform center offset in the case of Garmin, showing you on the width of the entire spindle where the power is being distributed to. That's useful in some cases for a bike fit to potentially adjust that a little bit, either on the bike fit side or on your shoe cleat, and where that's affixed to the shoe itself. And then it also shows seat and standing time for Garmin as well. As I noted earlier on, Favero does cycling dynamics, but they do kind of a subset of it. In particular, they do not do the platform center offset. Finally, we've got power accuracy. Almost all these claim the same thing at plus or minus 1%. SRM claims plus or minus 1.5%, and in some places on the website, plus or minus 2%. But realistically speaking, all these pedals are accurate. I trust every single one of the pedals on this table right now from a power accuracy standpoint, and using not just for day-to-day riding, but using it as a reference device against other things that I test, other power meters, other trainers, other smart bikes, etc. I trust everything here across the board and have for quite a while. So I have no concerns on power accuracy. And in fact, you can see that across all of my videos and all of my written reviews that you'll find all these units mixed in there across not just these reviews, but of course, many other reviews that I've done. So that ultimately gets to the recommendation side of thing. And here's the thing. I have no problems recommending any of these. These all work great from a durability standpoint and a reliability standpoint. There are minor nuances and caveats to each one of them. For example, in the case of the SRM unit, it is more expensive than the rest of them, yet has a portion, half or even a quarter of the battery life for the rest of them. That makes it more challenging unless you have very specific things that you want out of this particular pedal. For example, maybe the weight itself. This pedal weighs less than the Garmin SPD equivalency. In the case of road pedals, it's virtually impossible to beat the value of the Favero Assioma pedal. Not only is it astoundingly accurate, but it's also reliable, and it's inexpensive. Like, it's again basically half the price of Garmin's pedals. You can pretty much equip two bikes with full dual-sided Favero Assioma pedals for the price of one set of the Garmin road pedals. Of course, if you have different cleat types, that is where Garmin's ecosystem can make more sense if you want to swap between them. And then finally, if you've got Speedplay, you've only got one option, which is Wahoo. And I've had great success with the Wahoo POWRLINK and plan to buy and utilize more of them within the greater scheme of my testing kind of setup here. With that, hopefully I've covered everything you want. If you got any questions, feel free to drop them down in the comments there and I'll try to get to them. Also, I've got my full written review as well that has even more tech details that I couldn't quite fit in this video. Have a good one.